Many people know this character. You've seen her in coffee mugs, phone cases, t-shirts. She has been licensed onto more merchandise than almost any other cartoon character in history. And yet, the cartoons that built that icon, the ones that gave her everything that made her, are some of the least watched animation in history. So people have been carrying around her face for decades, but no one has actually met her. She is in the truest sense of the word iconic, but here's what's strange about that. The character that's being sold to people, that safe-looking, domesticated, slightly winking Betty you've seen in just about every product, is not the Betty Boop that was created. She is what was left after a systematic effort to remove everything that made the original interesting. To understand how that happened, you have to go back to before Betty existed at all, back to the studio that built her and what it cost them to do it. By the late 1910s, brothers Max and Dave Fleischer were already making a massive name for themselves as animation pioneers. By 1921, they officially founded their own studio, out of the Inkwell films, built around one of the earliest recurring characters in the medium, Coco the Clown. They got there because in 1914, Max Fleischer invented something that would quietly reshape animation history, the rotoscope. The concept was incredibly tedious but straightforward. Project live film footage frame by frame on a glass panel and then trace over it. The resulting animation moved with this bizarrely fluid, almost surreal quality that hand-drawn work of the era simply couldn't match. He patented it in 1915, and for years it gave the Fleischers an advantage no one else could replicate. But their most significant innovation came in 1924. Using the DeForest phonofill process, Fleischer produced the Coco Song Cartoons shorts, where a bouncing ball tracked across the lyrics as the music played. Sound and animation perfectly synchronized. Think of it as the 1920s version of karaoke. People would go to a theater, they would watch newsreels and other films, and in this case, this is just a simple thing to get audiences to sing along. Imagine if they try to get people to do that right now. I wonder how that will turn out. So that was in 1924, and just for context, Steamboat Willie came out 4 years later in 1928. To be fair, those Coco Song cartoons, not all of them were made with sound, a lot of them were made silently. I believe the first one was released initially silent and sound was added, and the technology was certainly primitive. Steamboat really rightly is one of the earliest cartoons that actually had a narrative that had synchronized sound to it. By the mid-1920s, the studio had partnered with a producer named Alfred Weiss to expand the operation. Then in 1927, Weiss's mismanagement collapsed the company. The Fleischers were forced into bankruptcy, temporarily losing the rights to Coco, the very character they built their studio around. They had to start over, and in 1929 they were bailed out by Paramount and refounded as Fleischer Studios. They launched a series called Talkartoons. They needed a new star, and what they found, almost by accident, was one of the most recognized faces in the world. In March 1930, the Talkartoons series introduced Bimbo the Dog, in a short called Hot Dog. I mean, why not, right? Bimbo was designed to carry the series and every main character with enough flexibility to build a franchise around. Sounds like a certain other mouse character, doesn't it? And I know what you're thinking, but Bimbo in the 1920s actually referred to a tough guy who liked to fight. The definition has certainly changed over the years, hasn't it? Bimbo was fine. He was okay for a character that came out around that time, but on August 9th, 1930, something unplanned happened. In the short Dizzy Dishes, a small supporting character appeared in a cabaret scene. She had floppy ears, a short dress, and a way of moving that the audience was never going to forget. She wasn't named in the short, she didn't really need to be, but that poodle was the very first version of Betty Boop. Over the year, the character was refined. The poodle ears became hoop earrings, the dog nose became a button nose. Lead animator Grim Natwick shaped her visual identity, drawing from a very specific cultural moment. And side note, Grim Natwick would go from this boundary-pushing sex symbol to being one of the lead animators on Snow White. So there's a nice little contrast there for you. But the blueprint was the 1920s flapper, so free-spirited, jazz-age, unapologetically expressive. Actresses like Clara Bow were a direct visual reference point. Betty Boop was not designed to be safe, she was designed to feel alive. Because you have to remember at the time, animation and film for that matter was a bit of a wild west in terms of what boundaries could or couldn't be pushed. Her very first voice actress was Margie Hines. But in 1931, Mae Kestel, who would actually be known as the voice of Betty Boop, took over the role, winning a sound-alike contest to get the job. That particular delivery, that specific sound, became inseparable from the character. By 1932, Betty had eclipsed Bimbo entirely and was given her own dedicated series. The studio had exactly what they had been looking for, but someone else had a major problem with it. Helen Kane was a massive star. In the late 1920s, she built a performance around the baby voice delivery with a particular boop boop beep boop vocal tick that she considered her own. In 1932, Kane filed a lawsuit against Max Fleischer and Paramount Pictures for a staggering $250,000. And remember, this is 1930s money, so you can imagine how much that would be now. Her claim was that Betty Boop had entirely appropriated her voice and her image, destroying her career in the process. When that case finally went to trial in 1934, what the defense uncovered changed the picture entirely. The defense located a theatrical manager named Lou Bolton. His testimony established something significant. Helen Kane had witnessed a black performer named Esther Jones, known professionally as Baby Esther, performing at the Everglades restaurant in New York in April 1928. The baby voice style, the distinctive vocal delivery that Kane claimed as her own invention, had been Baby Esther's first. Kane sued Fleischer for appropriating her style, but the court found that she appropriated it from someone else. A black jazz singer whose contribution was never publicly credited and who received absolutely nothing from a massive lawsuit fought entirely over work that had originated with her. Helen Kane lost. The $250,000 claim was dismissed. Baby Esther's name entered the court record and was then largely forgotten. Meanwhile though, as for the cartoons, they just kept getting better and better. In 1932, Minnie the Moocher was released. Legendary bandleader Cab Calloway provided the music, and was actually in it. Max Fleischer actually filmed Calloway dancing live in the studio, and the animators traced his exact footwork onto a ghostly walrus. The result is a character moving with a liquid, uncanny position that audiences had never seen. Louis Armstrong was brought in for I'll Be Glad When You're Dead, You Rascal You. The studio was drawing directly from the authentic living culture around them, because don't forget, the Fleischer Studios were based in New York. The other studios that were around at the time, like Disney, the Fleischer Studio, they were all in LA. So the pre-code Betty Boop shorts are remarkable documents, and they were really surreal, and they were genuinely funny, and they operated with complete, untamed freedom. Over at Disney, Minnie Mouse, let's not kid ourselves, she was just a means to an end for the plot, for, say, Mickey to rescue her and that sort of thing. But Betty was entirely her own entity. She was sexy, but she wasn't a victim. She actively fought back against villains. And they were pushing boundaries technically too. Years before Disney's multiplane camera, Fleischer used the stereoptical process, literally building 3D miniature sets on a turntable and placing standard animation cells in front of them. And you can see this beautifully in Betty Boop's 1934 short, Poor Cinderella, which is her only classic solo appearance in full color. And they were at the top of their game, but unfortunately, that freedom had a clock on it. In 1934, the Motion Picture Production Code, aka the Hays Code, was strictly enforced across the American film industry, and the animation industry was also included in that. Its mandate was to regulate content they deemed morally unsuitable. In practice, it was just a checklist of everything the pre-code era had done freely. Betty Boop failed almost the entire checklist. So the garter was gone, the neckline moved up, the hemline moved down, the suggested delivery was removed, the gritty jazz club settings disappeared, and Bimbo the Dog, he was quietly retired completely. Because Betty had morphed from a dog into a fully human woman, the censors believed the dog in a romantic relationship with a human presenting character no longer passed their purity inspection. I could go on and on about just how insane some of the Hays Code's decisions were, not just in animation but in film in general, but I would be here forever if I did that. In 1933, Betty had introduced a character from the Thimble Theatre comic strips in a short called Popeye the Sailor. The timing is brutal. In the exact same year she was launching the character who would eventually eclipse her, the conditions that would end her own golden era were forming. Under the Hays Code, you could show Popeye beating the stuffing out of an army of men without any issues, but don't you dare show Betty's garter or her bra or panties or anything even remotely suggestive. After 1934, the studio desperately tried to rebuild Betty around a new, heavily sanitized supporting cast. A pet dog named Pudgy, an incredibly boring boyfriend named Freddy, an eccentric inventor named Grampy. They even tried replacing her entirely with a younger swing dancing character called Sally Swing, and a tomboy cousin named Buzzy Boop. I mean, the postcode shorts aren't without craft, but something was unmistakably absent. The edges were gone, the danger's gone, and the audiences definitely noticed. So on August 11th, 1939, Betty Boop's original theatrical series came to an end with a short called Yip Yip Yippee. While billed as a Betty Boop short, it doesn't feature her anywhere. Her last appearance was a month earlier in a cartoon called Rhythm on the Reservation, which, as the name implies, had some unfortunate Native American stereotypes in it. There was no grand announcement, no send-off, the series just stopped. And by this point, Popeye had completely eclipsed her in terms of popularity in his shorts. But Betty Boop actually never went away, she simply became something else. The merchandise empire that exists today is built on a specific, carefully managed version of a character that was stripped of anything that made the original remarkable. The merchandise of Betty is safe. She is commercially, well, everywhere, both on legal merchandise and knockoffs they can just about find everywhere. But the cartoons that built her are not. You might find some on YouTube. There have been restorations finally of her shorts that are coming out. And I, for one, definitely would love to see a full Blu-ray of Betty Boop, but properly restored. There have been attempts in the past, but those attempts have not been the greatest. But those pre-code shorts, the ones with Cab Calloway's Ghost Walrus, the ones with Louis Armstrong with the surrealist sequences that pushed animation into territory it had never explored, those are the works that justified everything that followed. They are the reason that the image survived. But, again, they are the least watched parts of her legacy. Betty Boop burned as brightly as any animated character in the history of the medium. And then an industry decided that brightness was a problem. What they couldn't do was extinguish the image. They just severed it from everything that had set it alight in the first place.
Story about Minnie the Moocher. She was a red-hot hoochie coocher. She was the roughest, toughest frail. Minnie had a heart as big as a whale. Hoddy ho!